Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Adele Newton, and I will be moderating this conversation. I am currently chair of the SIGGRAPH Communications Committee, and I have a long and checkered past with SIGGRAPH, which includes being on the executive committee and co-chairing the SIGGRAPH 88 conference. But really, I'm thrilled today to be with friends and colleagues for this really interesting and exciting panel. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce people based on where they are on my screen. Just for the people in the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. This is being recorded and will be up on the SIGGRAPH website after probably next week for anyone who wasn't able to make it today. So without further ado, Maxine. Maxine Brown has a long history of service to computer graphics and the supercomputing communities, including serving on the ACMSIGGRAPH Executive Committee as SIGGRAPH 79 Exhibits Co-Chair, SIGGRAPH 84 Electronic Theater Chair, and of course, Conference Chair for SIGGRAPH 92 in Chicago. She just recently retired as director of the Electronic Visualization Lab at the University of Illinois. But in terms of SIGGRAPH, she's contributed to many facets, notably the development of the trade show, the introduction of live performances at the Electronic Theater, as well as changing the name to Electronic Theater. It was Film and Video Show before that. So welcome, Maxine. It's great to see you again after so many years that we haven't seen each other. Marie-Paule Cani is a professor of computer science at École Polytechnique Paris-Saclay in France. Her research interests cover both shape modeling and computer animation. Marie-Paule received the Eurographics Outstanding Technical Contributions Award in 2011, a silver medal from CNRS in 2012, and was elected at the Academia Europea in 2013. She joined the ACMSIGGRAPH Academy in 2019 and was elected at the French Academy of Sciences in 2020. In terms of SIGGRAPH, Marie-Paule was the technical paper chair of SIGGRAPH 2017 and served on the executive committee from 2007 to 2011 and was a member of the ACM Publications Board from 2011 to 2014. I truly don't know where you ladies have time to have a life after all this stuff. It's so much. Maureen Stone. Hi, Maureen. Maureen began working in computer graphics in the early 70s as part of the Plato project at the University of Illinois. Maureen's best known for her expertise in digital color and its applications, but has broad experience in digital design, interactive graphics, and user interface design. She spent the first part of her career at Xerox PARC, working on projects related to the new fields of desktop publishing, digital document design, and digital planning. She is the author of a field guide to digital color and was program chair for SIGGRAPH 87. So she is currently a director at Tableau Research, where she's focused on the interaction between visual perception and design. And last but certainly not least is Rebecca I'm going to say it wrong, Strzelec. I said it. Rebecca is a distinguished professor of visual arts and program coordinator of visual arts studies at Penn State University, Altoona College. Her work consists of wearable objects, such as the one she's wearing today, which are created via computer-aided design, three-dimensional modeling, 3D printing. And her work is included in the permanent collection of the Museum of Arts and Design, the Fuller Craft Museum, the Racine Art Museum, as well as the private collection of former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright. And Rebecca served as chair of the SIGGRAPH 2012 conference. So welcome everyone, welcome ladies, and it is my pleasure to be having this conversation with you today. So I'm going to start with a question. What or who inspired you to pursue studies and a career in science? And I'm going to start with you, Marie-Paule.
Okay, as a student, I loved art. I loved also literature and history. And I had an elder sister, 1 year older than me, who was excellent in literature, and she did that. My mother said, okay, since I was very good in math, okay, you do math. So she didn't want us to compete, in fact. So I went into math, but still thinking about art, my love for art, my love for literature and history, and now I can put all this together in my recent work in computer graphics research, which is really good.
That's wonderful. So the connection to art leads me to Rebecca. So do you consider yourself an artist or a scientist or both?
Oh, probably an artist mostly, although I get along really well with scientists and especially engineers. For all intents and purposes on campus, I am an engineer. I have keys to all of their rooms and all of their buildings. And I teach their students. So I guess I play an engineer on TV. But for sure, my teachers growing up, right? So I can distinctly recall moments in elementary school as early as second, third, fourth grade, wanting to not leave the art room. And that continued in through junior high school, where Mrs. Robin Eichelberger let me stay after school to rearrange her supply closets. And just this, I mean, it's giving me chills thinking about it, the ability to like pull all these supplies and line them all up and then put them all back felt like magic to me. And I think it was then I knew I'd do something with art. I think I wanted to be them for the longest time. And then I went to grad school and realized that I probably wanted to be doing my own research and holding my own studio practice as well. So definitely, my public school teachers were the ones who kind of helped me understand that I could do this thing and that I was good at it. And so without them, I probably would have picked something else.
It's really great to reflect on that and for people to understand how important teachers are to kids' aspirations. What about you, Maureen? What made you want to be a scientist, or who?
So it was my mother. I had been unsure what I wanted to be. I was back in the era when, your kind of choices were English teacher or secretary. And the mother found a program at the University of Illinois, run by NSF, that would give you 6 weeks on campus and the opportunity to learn about engineering, because you don't actually learn about engineering in high school, right? You learn about science. So unfortunately, they only had 3 girls apply that they thought were qualified, so they didn't want to bother to open a dorm. So they turned me down for that. But they then pointed me to a 2-week program called the Junior Engineering Technical Society, or JETS, which was a compressed version of that. And since there was like a cheerleading boot camp or something, I don't know. Anyway, they opened a dorm, they let us in, and we spent the morning learning calculus and the afternoon going around and seeing every possible form of engineering. And if you've been to Illinois or any of the Big Ten kind of campuses, there's like a whole building or 2 for each domain. I remember them pulling apart steel bars. I remember them talking about ceramic engineering. Who knew that was a thing? And I met a computer. I think it was an ILIAC 3, but that got me very interested in computing, which was very, nascent at the time. And when I went to college a few years later, I ended up at Illinois and ended up going to the Plato Project and then eventually to Park, and doing my career that way. Although you're probably going to ask about computer graphics, so I'll save that story until you do.
But I love the connection to Illinois, because of course that leads to Maxine. What made you decide to be a scientist or study or pursue science?
Well, so when I was a young girl, I loved art, and I wanted to be an artist when I grew up. And I found out in high school that I wasn't as good in art as the other kids in my class. So I decided to keep art as a hobby, but I didn't know what to do. I was fortunate. I had some wonderful male mentors, and it started with my high school math teacher. We had parent-teacher visitation day, and he turned to my mother and said, "She's really good in math. She should go into it." So I decided to go to college and study math. And in college, I took my first computer class. Back in the 70s, it was the only computer class offered to undergraduates, and I really liked it. So I told my professor that I wanted to study this in grad school. And he looked at me and says, "Well, there's only 12 grad schools that teach computer science, so I'll give you the list." So I did apply, and in grad school, I still kept art as a hobby, and I was always volunteering to do newsletters, flyers, and so people knew I could draw. And I had a professor, Steve Smolier, who came up to me and said, "I have a master's thesis project and I need somebody who likes to draw little pictures. You're it." And so it was vector drawing, but that's the state of the art University of Pennsylvania, where I went, and the rest is history. I wrote a paper on my master's thesis and gave it at SIGGRAPH 76, and that's how I got introduced to SIGGRAPH.
Wow. I love how the art winds its way through all the stories. And even with me, I was trying to decide in my final year of high school whether to go into Romance languages or math. And I chose math because I thought it would make me think more logically. I didn't realize at the time you can't really change who you are, but I decided to do math instead. So it's funny how we make our choices. So Maureen, what made you go into computer graphics? Did you always want to do computer graphics?
No, I mean, the little bit that we did on the Play-Doh project was, very simple line drawings. I decided I wanted to branch out and get a PhD, and I went to Caltech for a year. And Ivan Sutherland was the director of the department. It was a brand new department. It wasn't the august sort of place it is now in terms of computer graphics. And Jim Blinn was teaching computer graphics. And so I took his course. And when I decided I didn't really want to get a PhD at Caltech for a wide variety of reasons, I managed to scramble my way into Xerox PARC, and not actually PARC itself, but sort of a subsidiary. And I worked on an illustration and design system there. And that started my career. I went to SIGGRAPH 78 with Jim as a sort of a tour guide. So I got a good shot at seeing all those, meeting all those people. I probably met Maxine there, along with everybody else you've heard of from that era. So that was very much it. I loved the blend. I had taken a computer engineering degree as an undergrad and as a master's, and they were, a blend of math and electrical engineering kind of things. I love the way that graphics made the math visible. Math as an abstraction never worked for me. And I feel bad I didn't do much art in high school or anything. I did a little bit, but mostly I did music. That's my hobby.
So it's interesting because both when Maxine and Maureen were in school, computer graphics probably wasn't even, it was nascent at best, right? It wasn't really a field. But Rebecca, by the time you were going to school, did you decide to go into the graphics, the computer side of things, or did you fall into it?
No, I went to Tyler School of Art, which is Temple University's art college, as a painting major. Out of high school, I was doing painting in high school, and I was convinced. And then I think I had a similar experience that Maxine had. I got into my painting classes, and I'm like, I'm not very good at this. Like, my high school teacher thought I was wonderful, and my parents, of course, in my neighborhood, but I'm just not a very good painter. And I took an elective class in metals and jewelry. And I really liked that because I could make metal melt and move and play with fire, and I could make cool Christmas gifts, it just felt very utilitarian and
practical,
very valuable.
Yeah.
Like I loved all parts of it. I loved all the tools. And then I was required, and I went kicking and screaming into a new requirement of a computer-aided design class. I didn't want to be in a computer lab. I checked my first email as a sophomore in college. So I'm still on that cusp of it not being ubiquitous, but at the same time, hated that class, hated it. My mentor, Stanley Lexon, probably remembers me fighting him. I was the worst student. And it one of those moments that you talk about, and I see in my students when I was making a linkage, like a chain linkage, and I was opening, like I was literally carving these O-rings in a CAD program and opening them and then closing them. And he's behind me laughing. And I'm like, what is so funny? This is your assignment. I don't even want to be doing this. And he's like, you can just pass them through one another. There's no weight. There's no gravity. And inside I was like doing cartwheels because it was so exciting. And I was like, oh yeah, that's no big deal. And it was a huge deal because all of my ideas could come much faster and more fluently. And I was struggling with making metal move because I wasn't a master trades person in stone setting, right? So that became my new language. So it was sophomore year of college, and then everything switched and shifted. And then I stayed there for my master's degree.
So the best laid plans of being a painter.
I know.
Yeah.
Not so much. I'm a terrible painter. So it's a good thing I didn't stick around. So,
Marie-Paule, did you always know it was going to be computer graphics for you, combining your interest with art and math?
Not at all. I didn't know at all computer graphics existed. In fact, I started computer science in 86 as one of my, I was doing a pure math courses, and I had just one course of programming, and I quite liked it. So I decided, instead of becoming directly a teacher in mathematics, I decided to do a second year of master in computer science. And then I discovered computer science. I was in the artificial intelligence part of computer science. And among the courses, there was one course called computer graphics. The professor was Claude Puech. And I discovered that this existed, that you could merge, like create imaginary words. Claude Puech just had his first SIGGRAPH publication at the time. I think it was SIGGRAPH 86 or 87, about modeling trees, the first trees you could see in graphics. So this is really what conducted me to do a PhD with him in computer graphics.
Wow. Would you consider him to be a mentor in your career?
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah. What about Maureen, you? Who would you, do you have mentors that you would consider led you along in your career?
Well, of course, I had the relationship, the experience of knowing Jim Blinn and knowing him for many, many, many years. The first kind of works I did were in more the 2D and illustration and design world. And so may I show a picture or two?
Of course. Share your screen.
No.
Oh, you have real pictures.
I decided it was easier just to haul out the books, because honestly, why scan this stuff back in? So this is from the early 80s, probably late 79. This is all done with splines, 2D splines, and overlaid and filled areas, just like Adobe Illustrator, but shall we say a bit longer before.
This way, yeah. It's a penguin, yes.
The penguin, book covers. And we ended up having at Park, the system was called Griffin. I'll get it. And then bowls of fruit. I think that's kind of my level of art, is that bowl of fruit. So, but what was cool was we had color printers, we had color displays, we had mice and pointing and raster displays, and we could actually build these pictures. And it got set up as a service inside of Park. So everything that people needed to draw, they drew with Griffin. And so this was built on work by Patrick Baudelaire, who had done Draw, which was the early 70s version, which was only little black and white lines. Now you have to remember, computers are really slow back then. And so my first SIGGRAPH publication was actually called Techniques for Raster Graphics. And it was about being able to do splines and multi-selection and do this kind of rendering on these slow processors, but at interactive speeds. And it was with Patrick. But some of these pictures are in there. They wouldn't let us talk about Griffin per se, but for some reason, I think they were thinking maybe they were going to make a product out of it or something, as if Xerox ever did that. But it did also, I was working for Chuck Geschke, Warnock and Geschke. So we're both in our lab, and we went off and founded Adobe. So that certainly was a, encouraging in the work that they were doing, and especially Warnock was doing around creating a formalism for these kinds of resolution independent graphics. That was certainly a big inspiration. And then when I got into color, Bill Cowan and John Beatty, there's so many stories.
Yes.
And
well, we have some Waterloo stories together with Bill Cowan and John Beatty for sure.
We have some great Waterloo stories around that. Yeah. Flamingos, can anyone say flamingos? So the
Copper just asked you.
Copper just asked you to show that. Maybe while you're looking for that, I'll ask Maxine, who would you consider mentors in your career?
I don't have the flamingo.
Okay, well, is that one of your future questions?
It is one of my future questions. No, that's my current question to you, Max.
Okay, well, so mentors, I think that when I started getting involved with SIGGRAPH, I had a lot of mentors that got me, you know, my high school math teacher, this guy who taught my college class in computer science, my graduate professor who said I have a graphics job. But when I started with SIGGRAPH, it was held in Philadelphia in '76. And I just got a job at Hewlett Packard in the Bay Area. So I was going to move to California. And SIGGRAPH 77 was going to be in San Jose, California. So I was introduced to the organizers, Steve Levine and Jim George. And I'm still in touch with both of them to this day. And I would say that Jim George, he became my mentor. He basically guided my career, made recommendations. I asked him advice. I still do, but I would consider him my mentor.
Wow, that's not where I thought you were going to go.
I've had role models, and in the sense that mentor to me is somebody who guides you.
Right.
Then I've had role models that have been very, they've taught me a lot. And if you're thinking of Tom DeFonte, Jim George is the one that introduced the two. Jim George is the one that got us both involved in the SIGGRAPH organization. And then Tom hired me because he needed somebody who could do technical writing. And I wrote my first grant proposal with him. And Tom was very fair. If I put in the work, he gave me the credit. So I mean, I can't ask for more. And I think together we were a phenomenal team. Yeah. And we built the lab and, got a lot of funding, and we accomplished a great deal. In fact, you have another question, and one answer is, what are we most proud of from our that we've accomplished through SIGGRAPH? And Tom was invited to a NSF workshop back in the '80s on why do supercomputer scientists need visualization. And he came back from one of the meetings and he says, oh, we have to write a report. He says, you like to write, you're coming to the next meeting. And so the one thing that I feel is this report, Visualization in Scientific Computing. And in fact, it was funded by NSF, but SIGGRAPH agreed to publish it. So SIGGRAPH used to produce newsletters, printed newsletters mailed to your home, 4 of them a year. And SIGGRAPH was looking for, they had a committee that was, one thing they recommended is we should be looking at the future, and we should have ideas about where the organization and the conference are going. And Tom whipped out the rough draft and said, we've got it. Here's a rough draft of this report we're working on. And so Rick Beach at the time decided to publish it. And the rest is history, but I was one of the co-authors, and that meant a big deal. That was a big deal to me because I really think it changed, it put visualization on the map. It taught companies that academics and researchers were an industry that needed hardware and software to do computer graphics. It spawned off other conferences like IEEE Visualization Conference. So it changed the world to me. So Tom was definitely one of my mentors in that respect, but a role model.
Yeah. Well, that's saying a lot for someone like you who's done so much, that piece of work is what you're most proud of. That really says a lot, all the stuff that you've been.
I have other answers. I have little things that I started in SIGGRAPH because it was such a young organization. There was a lot to do that I am proud of, but that to me is the most important.
What about you, Marie-Paule? I know you've done some, you showed us some images before we started of the work when you started as a student at SIGGRAPH and what the state of the art is now. So what would you say you're most proud of the work you've done? Or let's look at this first.
Okay, yes, I wanted to share how computer graphics looked when I was a student on the left. And then my first SIGGRAPH when I was a master's student was SIGGRAPH 87. at SIGGRAPH 87, there was this joke paper about the green jello. Maureen knows that because she was a technical paper chair that year. And really, my English was very poor. I didn't understand much, but at least all this inspired me. And what I wanted to do in my research is objects that look much softer. And just after my PhD, I didn't manage to publish at SIGGRAPH during my PhD, but just after that, when I became assistant professor in Paris, then I discovered implicit surfaces. And these are pictures on the right from my two first SIGGRAPH papers in 93 and in 95 with Mathieu Desbrun, who was my first PhD student. And you see that I managed to, for the first time, to mix implicit surfaces and physically based animation with soft bodies, these soft toys here, which were colliding with contact surfaces. And then suddenly we could do soft substances and use implicit surfaces to coat them. And now all the fluid rendering, the surfaces around fluid particles are done nowadays with implicit surfaces. So this is something that I'm proud of. And another thing is all what I did about natural phenomena and natural environments, because as well as I started computer graphics, you know, being in front of a computer was not my passion. I like hiking, I like going outside. And in fact, it was a way to escape from all these man-made environments that we were seeing in old video games. I wanted to do stuff that were more natural. At the left here, you see some pictures from my first works and my more recent work here, when you can even sculpt mountain by pushing tectonic plates together on a tactile tablet and these nice ecosystems that we simulate now. That's
quite a difference, yeah.
But I also contributed to SIGGRAPH as being technical paper chair of SIGGRAPH. And here my contribution was to have women in the technical program committee. In 2016, there were only 2 women, 1.5, because Jessica Hodgin had only a half load that year. So it was less than 3% of women in the technical program committee. And when I became paper chair, I decided to have 25% of women. So slightly more than the research community in graphics, because I thought it's very important to be role models as well for young female PhD students. And what I was very happy, so to be so inclusive, I choose to invite all the women first, so that if they, very long time in advance, more than 1 year in advance, so that they knew that if they had young children, how they could manage to do this role very important of being in the SIGGRAPH committee. And then I was filling holes in the topics with men. So it was much simpler. I took all women who were good. It was not even, they were not evenly distributed among topics. And then I just filled the hole. And I was very happy to see that the next chairs of SIGGRAPH went on in these inclusive technical committees.
So it's remained as part of the structure of the committee now.
It's not exactly 25% the next years, but many of them try to reach this limit, yes.
That's fantastic. Rebecca, what are you most, well, first of all, did you have a mentor in your career?
Of course, several, and I still do. I mean, I'm a distinguished professor, so I've like ranked out, but I have very specific people I go to. Phil Renato is kind of my go-to every day, how to be a better teacher and artist. Alona Van Gent, who I met at SIGGRAPH. If I could do half of what she did professionally as an artist and how she kind of creates bridges for other people, I'm always thinking about like, what would Alona do in this situation? And I'm always comparing that. But then, you know, I'm lucky because as a conference chair, as several of you know, you come on so early so that you can kind of shadow the current conference chairs. So you have like kind of 2 to 3 conference chairs that you're watching. And so that kind of cohort of people, so Ronan Barzell and Jacqueline Martino and Pete Braccio, like I feel like without them, there's no way I could have done that job. So I have SIGGRAPH mentors, and then I have kind of personal mentors. The chancellor at Penn State Altoona has been a huge champion of mine and never says no. She says, well, let's figure it out on just about everything I need. And I'm in a teeny tiny place. And so that means the world most days. It's enough, which is great. And then your second question.
Well, before we get to that, I want to say, because I want to give a shout out to someone who's been a mentor to most of us at SIGGRAPH, and that's Cindy Stark.
Oh, yeah.
Because whenever I'm working on any kind of event, and this has been going on for more years than I care to admit. And I think all of us would say, now, what would Cindy do in a hotel negotiation, or what would Cindy do dealing with a difficult attendee? So I think all of us who have worked on the conference committee can point to her as well. And she's going to kill me for having said that.
Yeah,
But
and
I
that's
think it's
why, I
important.
thought about it. I was like, of course, Cindy, but I'm not going to say it.
I'll say it.
Because that's
Well, you know,
why she's so wonderful, because
Adele.
she doesn't need that. Like, I think that her service to SIGGRAPH and her job, of course, is holistically coming from this like passion to make this organization and these conferences better. And it's just so wonderful to be a part of with her. And if you have Cindy, if you have the ability to text Cindy at the drop of a hat, like your world's a better place for a lot of reasons. So yeah, she's huge.
Maureen, you were going to say something?
Well, I mean, Adele's saying, what would Cindy do? I just call her up and say, Cindy, would you please do it?
Oh, there is that too.
But, you know, absolutely +1 on, you know, in terms of the conference and the organization, you know, Cindy is SIGGRAPH for me.
Yeah.
Talk about women of influence. That's certainly,
yeah.
yeah. Absolutely. So Rebecca, what are you most proud of what you did at SIGGRAPH?
I mean, I think that there's not a most, right? It changed in the context, but I think, you know, I headed up what was then the Gorilla Studio in 2007, and I was pretty proud of that. And the job we did in San Diego, I think Cindy will know. And then of course I was conference chair in 2012, and I feel like we made some big changes kind of coming off some major reorgs from the conference. And I was kind of proud of some of those initiatives, but it's maybe more the lasting thing. So the proposal I co-wrote with Lena Yamaguchi to have our special issue of Leonardo, that is the publication that supports the art gallery and art papers, that's still ongoing, and very proud to have been a part of the beginning of that relationship. And then I served as CAG chair for a term. And I'd like to say that I helped bring in another generation of conference chairs and other conference leaders that are still around. And so, you know, sometimes when I see them coming up through and doing new things, I'm like, yeah, I was part of that. Like, look at them, right? And I love that. I love this idea that there's this constant scaffolding at SIGGRAPH, and we can always do better. Any organization can, but our people, you know, are our greatest treasure. And I think we do a good job of, you know, like I said, building up the ones who want more. You know, you can see them, you're like, you want to do something else, don't you? And we give them a way to do that.
It's that mentoring piece that's really important that we've all benefited from. So it's time to give back to the community. Yep. Now, I know because I've talked to all of you previously, or some of you, about this, but I want to ask, what brought you to SIGGRAPH in the first place? Because there's some interesting stories. So Maxine, what was your first introduction to SIGGRAPH? What made you part of the community?
So part of it I've told. My master's, or I went to school at University of Pennsylvania doing vector graphics as my master's thesis. SIGGRAPH 76 was being held there. So I told my professor I was going to write a paper and submit it. And I did. And then I found out I was moving to California, to the Bay Area, because I took a job with Hewlett Packard, data terminals division. There was no graphics industry that in those days. Right. It was mainframe computers and very expensive systems. And but SIGGRAPH 77 was going to be held in San Jose. So it was one of my professors at Penn, Norm Badler, introduced me to Jim George and Steve Levine, who were the organizers of SIGGRAPH 77, and said, she's a good organizer. So I said, well, I don't know anybody in the Bay Area, so sure, I'll help. And I was local arrangements chair, and we planned, people will laugh, but SIGGRAPH 76 had like 200 people, maybe 300. That was it. And so we planned for maybe 400 or 500, and we got almost 1,000. We were going crazy. So I was so tired. I went to the film and video show That was the first time. Tom Defani and Dan Sandine had always brought a video projector to their hotel room, and people would bring video cassettes and they'd sit and watch it. So at SIGGRAPH 77, we put it in a ballroom and everybody could watch the video show at once. And I was half falling asleep. I was so tired organizing the conference, and all of a sudden there's this Mercedes-Benz symbol going around and around on the screen. It was done by a company called III, Information International Incorporated. I'm half asleep going, why is they spinning a Mercedes-Benz symbol? And all of a sudden I woke up and said, it's computer generated. Now my background, had vector graphics a year before in grad school. So that changed my life. That stupid
Flying logo changed your life.
I said, oh my God, look at what all you can do. And I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, I ended up working for, the guys left the company III. They had worked on Tron and they started a company, Digital Productions.
Oh, wow.
And at one point I joined Digital Productions, and but I knew that I wanted to work in this field. After Hewlett Packard, I left HP because there was one graphics software company and they did business graphics. Today, we all have Excel on a PC, but in the 70s, there were no PCs. They weren't invented yet. There was, this was like a very expensive software package that ran on mainframe computers. And for bar charts, line charts, and pie charts. And so I ended up doing documentation, and that's, but because of, I worked actively in the field. SIGGRAPH was just a volunteer job, but after helping organize SIGGRAPH 77, I stayed very active in the conference, and then Jim George had me run for secretary of SIGGRAPH in the early 80s.
Which is when I met you.
And so so then
82, yeah.
I worked in both the organization and the conference.
Right. I love that story, that the flying Mercedes logo got you into it. Now, Maureen has a great story of how you got into SIGGRAPH.
Well, I got into SIGGRAPH with Jim Blinn, right?
Right.
But and then I managed to publish a paper. But the way I got into the organization of SIGGRAPH was at SIGGRAPH 81, John Warnock was on the program committee, and right before the meeting, he got appendicitis. And so he asked if I would take his reviews and fly out to see Henry Fuchs and the crowd and be his stand-in as the committee member. And so, of course, I leapt at the opportunity and went to his bedside and got comments. Anyway, so there I met, the program committee itself, the process. I met John and Kelly. I met Henry. I probably met a few other folks. I think I missed my plane because Henry had a really different idea of how long it took to drive back to the airport. It was all very, very exciting. And then I would periodically get invited to many of the conference committees after that. And then the way I got to be papers chair for 87, so Max talks about how tiny the conference was, and it was growing and it was growing. And a lot of our processes and procedures had been appropriate when it was tiny, but we're now getting a little too informal. And so I went to a papers meeting and yet another papers committee meeting, and I won't say which one. And I thought, I can do this better. And so I went.
You volunteered, didn't you?
And so I walked up, I said, I want to be papers chair. And everybody kind of blinks because, you're usually asked to be papers chair. You don't just ask for the job. And they said, well, I would go talk to this guy, Jim Thomas. He's going to be running the 87 conference. He's looking for a conference chair. And so I walked up to Jim Thomas and I said, I want to be your papers chair. And did Jim say, go away? He said, no, let's talk about it. And we just hit off. So the working with Jim on that conference committee. So it was Mike Bailey and Sarah doing tutorials and panels. And then I was the papers chair. We had Jim running the whole show. We had Cindy, of course, guiding us. There were probably more people I'm forgetting.
Bob Young was Jim's co-chair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bob Young. And so the thing I did was think very deeply about how reviewing worked. People, you know, we now had this mythos, you know, you send a paper to SIGGRAPH, and if you're ray tracing something, you get in, and if you're not, you don't. And so I wrote it all up, what the process is like, how you have, you know, all these papers come in, you have to give them out to senior reviewers. If I can't tell from the abstract and the intro what the paper is about, it goes to the wrong senior reviewer, it's going to be a problem. Focusing on that, we put together a small group of experts who would actually sort the papers rather than leaving it just to the paper chair. And then we expanded the meeting out to a day and a half to just give us more time because we were just getting a lot more papers. So this is all being done in the days of FedEx and physical copies and the like. And I think we had a really fantastic conference. I was really proud of the papers that we got in. I was extremely proud of the ray tracing Jello one. It showed up. I'm sure they expected us to just throw it straight out. I gave it to 3 very senior reviewers. When we stack ranked the reviews, it was the top of the stack because everybody loved it. The other paper that I'm really proud of is John Lasseter's paper on storytelling and the importance of that if you're going to do animation, of not just the motion, but actually telling the story. And that one I had to fight for. I remember arguing, I think it was with Don Greenberg. He goes, well, it's not science, it's not computer graphics. And I'm going, yeah, but it's important. And it was very important. So those particular processes, that attention to detail on the reviewing, the effort to really communicate back to the community what they could do to help get their papers in and not just have it be an accident. I was very proud of. And then I got me kind of hooked. I think I got onto the EC. Eventually I got onto the CG&A editorial board. I just kept doing these editorial board kind of things. So I wanted to show 2 more pictures. This is SIGGRAPH 78's cover.
Wow.
Okay, look at the quality of the graphics. This is SIGGRAPH 87's cover. Those are the bicycles.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back, we have the flocking, and we have solids, and we have faces, and we have radiosity down in the over here.
So that was 9 years in between those 2.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's a really big run for a community in terms of the, you know, being at the forefront of evolving technology. That was part of the excitement. And then helping it do a little adulting in its processes.
I think that resonates with what Marie-Paule was saying in terms of, well, first of all, I love that when you were program chair is when Marie-Paule was intrigued by the Jello paper. I think that, and we did not know that when we put this panel together. So I love that serendipity. Marie-Paule, what got you into being a part of the SIGGRAPH conference committee and working on the conference?
In fact, it took me much longer than you. I'm impressed how quickly you could get involved. Myself, I think I always wanted to be involved because I was so impressed by the conference. It took me 6 years after I attended SIGGRAPH to get my first paper in. And then it took me, I remember it was Andrew Glasner who was technical paper chair. And he said, who would like to volunteer to serve in the technical program committee? You just need to have one SIGGRAPH paper to be candidate. So I was candidate. I said, I want to be in the committee. He never answered. I was never invited. It took me more than 10 more years to be invited in the SIGGRAPH committee. If I remember well, it was Marcus Gross, the first paper chair from Europe, who invited me first. And then I was invited, but I had very often to decline because I had 3 kids. And I'm a divorced woman, so I could not easily travel to go to the meeting. So I was invited from time to time, but I was also invited to serve in the executive committee of SIGGRAPH, which was really interesting. And really, I took time to try to attend the meetings and so forth. It was much more difficult even to be in the ACM publication board. It took me many years. And you see, I became technical paper chair of SIGGRAPH 30 years after I attended my first conference.
Wow.
So it's really,
it took time
to be patient in this career, especially maybe, I mean, I'm not a native English speaker, maybe, and then I'm not an American, and it took me more time.
Well, your English would put all of our French to shame. So rest assured your English is perfect. Rebecca,
it's a lot about it being much smaller. Marie-Paule, it really is. I mean, when something has got a very small community, it's easy to break
easier.
in.
Yeah.
And by the time,
sure.
you know, and the conferences were huge. And then being European has always been a challenge for people in SIGGRAPH when we all had to travel, you know, to be in places. It's a long way to come. And, you know, it's much different when you're bopping down from San Francisco to Anaheim than when you are coming in from France.
And we didn't have Zoom then. I don't know if that's good or bad right now. We all have a love-hate relationship. Rebecca,
but anyway,
sorry.
Good point. In taking time, it was a very good point. I had time to raise my 3 kids. And when they were grown up, I was invited much more often to travel. So
we planned it that way.
Well, Rebecca, you have little kids, really little kids.
Well, not till 10 and 7.
That's still little, yeah.
I mean, they're getting bigger every day.
What got you into SIGGRAPH first? You said it was the gorilla?
I got into the art gallery.
Yeah.
So I just started my tenure track position at Penn State. And as part of that, I had to exhibit. And so I was applying to anything I remotely qualified for just to get lines on my CV. And Kim Voigt, who's a longtime SIGGRAPH studio person, said, you should apply to this. And I was like, what is it even? And she's like, well, you have to go. If you get in, just go. And I just walked around like a deer in headlights for a week, because I had no explanation. I just showed up, and I kind of just hid in the studio because I felt safe there. And then it just kept building. I got into the art gallery one other time, and then started on the subcommittee. And, you know, it wasn't instant. It took years. And then I guess that culminates with the conference chair 10 years later.
10 years, yeah. So there's one question that's from the audience, which I'll get to in a second. And we've got about 10 minutes. So the last one before that question is, looking back with the experience that you've had, would you have done anything differently to prepare for your career and your life, not just your career? Max, I'll go to you first.
Well, you know, I doubt I would have done anything differently, because computers and computer graphics were both new when I started. I mean, it wasn't a broad-based thing. I am thankful that I did discover SIGGRAPH in the early days, as it not only changed my life, but it actually put me on my career path. In one thing that I noticed as I got older, I realized that in high school I liked art, but I wasn't that good, and I liked math. And I think all of us have this background of, and nobody gave me advice like you can combine the two. And this was high school days. Now the world's different. Now with video games and kids, you know, young kids are programming, you know, got graphics, souped up graphics boards. But in my generation, you know, my mom wanted me to be a school teacher. That's, as Maureen said, that's what you did in the 50s. And you can always fall back on it when the kids are grown. You know, I wish somebody had said to me like, oh, art and math, that's architecture, or that's, you know, and not that I would have been a great architect, but I had no options. So I kind of fortuitously just fell into these things, and, you know, fell into taking this computer class, loved the teacher, ended up in grad school. Guy needed a graphics person. I'm very fortunate. So I don't think there's much I could have done differently.
It's nice to look back without any regrets, except maybe you could have pursued your art more.
Well, yeah. That's always been a hobby. And, you know, when, in fact, I started doing a lot of technical writing and realized that graphic design was more my interest, not oil paints and watercolors. I made a mess, but precision. And so I got really into the drawing programs when they first came out because my flowcharts were really gorgeous. I'd spend time on that. And so I found how to funnel my art interests in just layout design in Microsoft Word, you know, but I use my art interests every day.
Perfect. Marie-Paule, would you have done anything differently?
I don't think so. I was so lucky in my career about the people I met. And as I told you, I had my kids. I was very young when I had my 3 kids. From 24 years old, I was still a PhD student, to 30 years old for the last one. And so in my career, maybe I declined some projects or collaborations or even supervising a few students when I was young, because I didn't want to take too many projects at the same time, because I was not so confident I could succeed, but I had more time for my kids at that time.
Right.
And little by little, I got more confident and I managed to have more projects and more students in parallel. And I'm really happy of what I have been doing in computer graphics and as a career. So I have nothing I would like to change.
Huh. What about you, Rebecca?
I was thinking while I was listening to Maxine and Marie-Paule's answers, I don't think I have anything that I regret. I think everything kind of built on each other. And if I would go back and undo something, I suspect it would mess up something I value quite a bit. So, I mean, I guess the one thing I can say that's sort of aligned is that, you know, I'm teaching and working in a place that's much smaller than where I studied and grew up. And I always thought I had this like 5-year plan. I'm going on 20 years now. And I had this 5-year plan that I was going to get out and go to a real job. And it took me a long time, and I still struggle with it sometimes. And I think in some ways being a part of SIGGRAPH helped, because being on the conference committee, you were somewhere every other month and you spent 10 days or longer in the summer with all these brilliant people. And it expanded my world in such a way that I came back and I was like, this is okay. Like, I'm okay. And so I think, if anything, without SIGGRAPH, I don't know what would have happened to me if I couldn't get out of Dodge and do these other things that made me feel more balanced.
Good thing that you and SIGGRAPH got together then, and good thing for SIGGRAPH as well. Yeah. Maureen, would you have done anything differently?
Probably would have studied math harder in college, because I could have used that wisdom. But, you know, honestly, the being part of the Plato project with the novel technology there and the smart people, and then managing to claw my way into Park, even though I never did get that PhD, and work my way up through that sort of PhD on the job, all the learnings I did. I just can't replace those 20 years at Park. I mean, at the end, I was working with Rich Gold, who's another amazing person, or was, and talking about art, design, research, and science, and research, engineering, art, and design. And those are 2 mirrors on each of those fields, where engineering and design are more similar than design and art, for example. The mental models, all of those. And then I contracted for a year while the kids were growing up. I had my kids late. So after Park, or late in my Park career. And then I dropped down to contracting and consulting so that we could have the flexibility in the family. And then once they got big enough, I joined Tableau, and being part of Tableau and that little startup and helping people see and understand data. They have this tremendous mission. And so always I've been part of these mission-driven things. So I think that's all, you know, I think it's all good. You know, there's more skills I could have learned. There's more things I could have done differently, but yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear from all of you that you wouldn't have done much differently, that you're good with where you are. Now we have 5 minutes left, and I want to point out that we're doing this on the last day of International Women's History Month to close out the month. So I want to ask each of you, in the short time we have left, what message about working in science would you give to young women in the audience? And this is on the thought of mentoring that we had talked about before. So I'll start with you, Max.
So the standard answer is pursue your dreams and, go invent the future. What's wonderful about the computer graphics world, the visualization world, is that, first of all, it applies to everything. And so does technology today. It doesn't matter if you're a computer scientist or an artist or a domain scientist, a geologist. Everybody uses the computer. Everybody collects data on the computer. And so I think I would suggest study computers. You don't have to that doesn't have to be your end game, but be proficient, because you can help a lot of people or you can use it in your career.
Rebecca, that sounds a lot like what you might say, so I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm thinking about my daughter, Stella, who's 10, and I love how she just asks her question. She doesn't care who the adult is. She doesn't care where they are in the hierarchy. She just, excuse me, why does that work that way? And so I guess I would just say, ask your question, whatever it is that you think you need to know. Don't worry about if it comes out right. Don't worry about if somebody will think differently of you because you don't know it. I can think of many times in my life where I was like, I'm not going to ask that because that might mean, and I would talk myself out of it. I'd lose my nerve. So just ask your question.
Be vulnerable.
Yeah, ask it. What's going to happen? Right?
Yeah. Marie-Paule.
I really agree. I think we should be confident enough to ask about what we don't know, because many people also don't know, and we'd be happy to hear the answer. What I would advise to especially young women, and but also everybody, is just to try to twist your work to make what you really like enter and be part of your work. And this is something we can very often do. We are all unique. We can modify the way the work is done, and this adds a lot of diversity. To finally, it will be much more successful. And another advice is, once you are asked in our career in computer graphics research, for instance, we are asked for much more. Too many things, many committees, many supervision, many writing papers, and so on. So we cannot accept it all. So my way is to accept all what attracts me, what I enjoy the more. And then I have no more time for what I don't like. So this is an advice I can give as well.
Thank you. Finally, Maureen, what advice would you give a young woman?
Well, for those who are still stuck in situations where they're thinking math and science is not for girls, and unfortunately that's still a case, don't believe them, just do it. It's good for the mental discipline, even if you don't think of the careers. I had an English teacher who was lecturing us all about that sort of thing, and that was a long time ago, and it's still a problem. Then the next is to continue to work to change the culture of technology. Don't look back at the old days. Let's stop. I mean, Grace Hopper is lovely, but there's an awful lot of women in science. If you go to something like Grace Hopper conference, there's all this generations behind who are making the picture of women in science so different. And let's keep doing it. We have to have women of all shapes, colors, and interests. We have to have women with and without families. We have to create a career that isn't just about geeks. And so let's do it. Let's really start emphasizing. When you do the next one of these Adeles, let's get a bunch of younger folk in there talking about what computer graphics is like now, because that would be the role model for women. Right.
And you know what? That's a really good idea to do another one. So I'm going to take that challenge on, Maureen. But in the meantime, I'm going to thank all of you. This has been a great hour. Thank you so much to all of you. And for the people in the audience, this will be up on our website. For those of you who have colleagues who weren't able to join us, please let them know. And I'm going to thank all of you and stop the recording.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you for organizing.